The year is 60 BC. An ambitious Julius Caesar returns to Rome from his governorship in Spain, preparing to run for consul. In secret negotiations, he forges a clandestine alliance with Pompey and Crassus, both disgruntled with the Senate. This was the First Triumvirate. The final chapter of the Roman Republic, a decade of brutal civil war, had effectively begun. The Roman Empire would rise from these ashes, but the glorious era of the Pax Romana was still more than 30 years away. At this very moment, on the other side of the world, the great Han Empire, now nearly 150 years old, was witnessing a historic moment. In this year, the Xiongnu's century-long dominion over the western regions came to an end. The Xiongnu official who held the title of King Riju, essentially the viceroy of the western regions responsible for collecting taxes, had been passed over for the throne. Disaffected, he led his tribe of tens of thousands on a long journey east to surrender to his people's century-old nemesis, the Han. When the news arrived, the Han Emperor immediately dispatched 50,000 soldiers to welcome King Riju's forces, settling them deep within the empire's heartland and ennobling Riju as a marquis. With King Riju's defection, the Xiongnu's already battered authority in the western regions completely collapsed. The Han Emperor promptly announced the establishment of the Protectorate of the Western regions, appointing a Protector General to oversee and protect the 36 kingdoms of the area. This meant that after a century of struggle, the contest between the Han and the Xiongnu for control of the western regions was over. For the first time, this vast territory came under the direct administrative jurisdiction of a central Chinese dynasty. The Protectorate of the Western regions encompassed not only all of modern-day Xinjiang, but also a large portion of Central Asia. Even by conservative estimates, this territory covered a staggering 2 million square kilometers. That's equivalent to the combined area of Texas, California, Montana, New Mexico, and Colorado. It's larger than the United Kingdom, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy combined. And this was just a small glimpse of this empire's miraculous golden age.
Hello everyone, and welcome to China Puzzle. I'm ZYQ. Today, we finally introduce the first heavyweight protagonist of our Chinese Chronicles series, Emperor Xuan of Han. To properly introduce this pivotal emperor, we have already released 2 episodes in our chronicle for the years 74 BC and 66 BC, telling the story of how he ascended the throne and how he neutralized the powerful court officials who sought to control him. We have 2 more episodes dedicated to him, this one for 62 BC and another for 49 BC, plus 3 related Her Story episodes. In total, we will spend over 200 minutes unpacking the legendary life of this emperor. So let's answer our first question. Why is he so important? The answer is in the title, because he was arguably the best ruler in Chinese history. This isn't just our claim. In recent years on the Chinese internet, young people's fascination with him has exploded, with the level of discussion and praise far exceeding the official historical records. His life story, his achievements, his philosophy of governance, even his love life have all become hot topics of debate. For his early life story, you can click the info card to watch our other videos. Here, we'll give you a brief overview.
He was the grandson of the crown prince, but just after he was born, his entire family was falsely implicated in a treason plot. His grandparents, his parents, all his siblings, every single one of his immediate relatives exterminated. Only the infant, still in swaddling clothes, was thrown into prison to die. A sympathetic warden and an old loyalist of his grandfather's secretly hid his existence, feeding him with the milk of female inmates inside the prison walls. Several times he was on the brink of death, saved only by the desperate efforts of these loyal and kind-hearted men. It wasn't until he was 5 that his family's name was cleared. The reigning emperor, his great-grandfather, learned of his existence, acknowledged his royal blood, and released him in a general amnesty. But this great-grandson still had nothing. He was an insignificant figure in the vast imperial family. The warden arranged for him to be raised by his grandmother's family, an old courtier who had been castrated for supporting the disgraced crown prince, personally oversaw his education. While other imperial princes were feasting in the grand palaces, He was growing up in the streets and alleys of the capital, traveling and studying in the countryside. He had tasted the full spectrum of human kindness and cruelty, and seen the suffering of the common people firsthand. Then, at 17, his fate took a dramatic turn. It was precisely his orphan status and commoner upbringing that made him the perfect puppet in the eyes of the court's regent. The powerful Huo clan placed him on the throne, and for several years he lived under intense pressure, like a spike in his back. He was respectful, humble, and cautious, even enduring the poisoning of his first wife by the regent's family without a word. He waited until the regent, Huo Guang, died of illness. Then, with meticulous planning, he struck 2 years later, annihilating the entire clan in one fell swoop. He had achieved both his personal revenge and the restoration of imperial power. This laid the foundation for all that was to come. He was only 25 years old.
An incredible story, isn't it? Full of unbelievable twists and turns. But if the first half of his life was a legend, the second half was an epic, because he would spend the rest of his life answering our second question: why was he the best? This is the main puzzle we will solve in this video. Let's start with the answer in a single sentence. Because he achieved one of the most glorious golden ages in Chinese history at the lowest possible cost. The achievements of this era in military, diplomatic, economic, and cultural spheres were nothing short of miraculous. Now, let us dissect the magnificent era he created, the zenith of Han Xiaoshuanjiji. First, to describe the great eras of peace and prosperity in ancient East Asia, historians coined a scholarly term in imitation of Pax Romana, Pax Sinica, the Chinese peace. It's used to describe long periods of stability in East, Northeast, Southeast, and Central Asia under Chinese leadership. This term is widely accepted by Western sinologists. There are generally considered to be 3 major periods of Pax Sinica: the Han Empire, the Tang Empire, and the Ming-Qing period. Some historians even refer to these as the first, second, and third Chinese empires. But regardless of the division, the peak of the Han Empire is always an essential part, and the reign of Emperor Xuan from 74 BC to 49 BC was the era when the Han Empire reached its greatest strength and largest territorial extent.
Besides the establishment of the Protectorate of the Western regions we mentioned earlier, in that same year of 60 BC, a 3-year-long war on the empire's western frontier came to a victorious end. Faced with a full-scale rebellion by the Qiang people, the brilliant General Zhao Chongguo, with Emperor Xuan's backing, resisted pressure from the warhawks in the court and steadfastly implemented the Tuntian plan, or agricultural garrison strategy. In the fertile river valleys, the Han soldiers would put down their swords and pick up their hoes, cultivating wasteland and building irrigation systems to become self-sufficient. By establishing these secure agricultural strongholds, the Han army would drive itself like a nail deep into the Qiang's heartland. This not only solved the logistical nightmare, but also applied long-term economic and strategic pressure. With the Han occupying the most fertile lands, the Qiang were forced to retreat to barren mountains and deserts. Their tribes, starved of resources, would inevitably turn on each other. Under this Tuntian offensive, unable to defeat the Han in open battle and with their best lands occupied, thousands of Qiang rebels surrendered. The rebellion, which had once threatened the major city of Jincheng, modern-day Lanzhou, was gradually extinguished. When the last hardline Qiang chieftain was forced to submit, Emperor Xuan ordered the creation of a special administrative zone, the Jincheng Dependent State. This was an institution specifically designed to settle the surrendered Qiang tribes. The Han court granted their chieftains titles of kings and marquises, allowed them a degree of autonomy within the dependent state framework, and used them to guard the frontier against other, more hostile external tribes. The pacification of the Western Qiang was far more than a military victory. Its impact on later Chinese history was profound. This impact wasn't measured by the scale of the war or the number of enemies killed, but by its textbook execution of achieving the most with the least. First, it elevated the Tuntian strategy from a temporary logistical solution to a national policy for managing frontiers, which was emulated by every dynasty that followed. This model of combining military presence with economic development became the most effective means for central dynasties to expand and consolidate their borders. Even in modern times, shadows of this strategy can still be seen in China's approach to its frontier regions. Second, the establishment of the dependent state created a mature and pragmatic system for managing different ethnic groups. It went beyond simple military conquest, skillfully integrating the defeated people into the empire's diverse system, turning enemies into allies and using barbarians to control barbarians. It demonstrated an imperial confidence of the highest order, a policy later known as Jimmy, or loose reign.
This is a living example of what we meant by the lowest possible cost. There was none of the relentless, decisive battles of Germanicus's revenge campaign in the Teutoburg forest, none of Rome's brutal subjugation of Carthage, razing the city and sowing salt in its fields. It was not even on the grand scale of Caesar's Gallic wars, but it was elegant, effective, and replicable. It achieved long-term peace with the minimum loss of life, not just for the Han, but for the Qiang as well.
The same philosophy, the same approach, was applied to the great rivalry with the Xiongnu. Let's turn our eyes back to the northern steppes. During Emperor Wu's reign, the powerful Han Empire engaged in 40 years of massive, decisive warfare with the Xiongnu. The Han launched 5 major campaigns, mobilizing over 1 million soldiers in total. These continuous, high-intensity, all-in wars certainly inflicted heavy losses on the Xiongnu, but for a sedentary agricultural civilization to completely conquer a nomadic one is next to impossible. So Emperor Wu, in his lifetime, paid the price of over 100,000 dead soldiers and a bankrupted empire in exchange for control over the Ordo's Loop and the Hexi Corridor. The final defeat of the Xiongnu, forcing them to migrate west, wouldn't happen for another 180 years during the Eastern Han. At the beginning of Emperor Xuan's reign, in 72 BC, the Han court responded to a desperate plea for help from the allied Wusun kingdom and the Han's own princess Jieyu, who had been married to the Wusun king. The histories record that the Han mobilized 5 of its top generals to lead a massive army of 150,000 men on an expedition against the Xiongnu. However, the Grand Army set out from the capital at the end of January, and by May, the military operation was declared over. The much-vaunted invasion force had failed to engage the main Xiongnu army. In the aftermath, 2 of the generals, disgraced for missing their window of opportunity, committed suicide. Instead, it was the Wusun army, operating under the command of a Han general, that launched a devastating surprise attack on the Xiongnu from the rear. They won a decisive victory. From this blow, the Xiongnu fell into a long period of decline.
This was the only recorded military operation involving more than 50,000 men during Emperor Xuan's 25-year reign, and given the timing, the decision to launch it was likely made by the regent, Huo Guang. Besides this, during the entire zenith of Han, Emperor Xuan did not launch a single large-scale war, either offensively or defensively. The Qiang pacification we just mentioned used only 10,000 farming soldiers. A later rebellion on Hainan Island was suppressed by a single colonel. Considering the 150,000-strong army of 72 BC did not fight a major battle, its losses would have been minimal. We can almost arrive at a chilling fact. In 25 years, the Han Empire pacified 2 frontier rebellions and brought over 2 million square kilometers of land under its administration at a cost of soldiers' lives that was infinitesimally close to zero.
But the empire's glory didn't stop there. The year after the regent Huo Guang died, Emperor Xuan announced a partial demobilization of troops on the northern frontier. This was an almost unheard of move in 150 years. In the early days of the Han-Xiongnu Wars, the Han was on the defensive, its border garrisons in a constant state of fear. During Emperor Wu's time, the balance of power shifted, but the ambitious emperor was unwilling to demobilize. Only under Emperor Xuan was reducing the army and easing the burden on the people not just a possibility, but the emperor's will. Of course, the root of this demobilization was the reduced pressure on the frontier. The Xiongnu, weakened and fractured, finally erupted into a fierce succession crisis in 60 BC. At one point, there were 5 contenders for the throne. Emperor Xuan watched coldly from the sidelines and further reduced his border forces by a fifth. By 55 BC, only two main rivals remained. The weaker of the two made a stunning decision. He asked his old enemy, the Han, for help. Though other Xiongnu nobles had surrendered to the Han before, this was the first time a leader of the highest rank had done so. And more importantly, as the weaker faction sent an envoy to the Han, the stronger faction, seeing the writing on the wall, also sent an envoy to establish good relations. After careful deliberation, Emperor Xuan chose to back the weaker one, a man named Huanye. Huanye crossed the Great Wall, came to Chang'an, and declared himself a subject of the Han Emperor. Emperor Xuan received him with the rights of a guest, placing his rank above all the feudal princes. This was 51 BC. Though there would be more betrayals and conflicts in the future, from this moment on, in a political sense, the Han-Xiongnu wars were over. That same winter, Princess Jieyu, the Han princess who had been sent to the far-off Wusun kingdom for a political marriage decades earlier, finally returned home. The Xiongnu were no longer a threat. The princess who had sacrificed her life for her country could finally come home in glory. From this year until 10 AD, for a full 60 years, besides one Han campaign to help Huanye eliminate his rival, there was no more war along the Great Wall.
To subdue the enemy without fighting. This is the highest ideal of Sun Tzu's art of war. An emperor born among commoners with no military experience had achieved it. At this point, a skeptical observer might point out that Emperor Xuan's achievements were all built on the relentless efforts of Emperor Wu, that he was standing on the shoulders of giants. This is not entirely without merit, but I don't wish to debate it, because for us, the military and diplomatic victories are not the most important part. What matters is how he won and the price he paid. In fact, even the peaceful means and the minimal cost are not the most important part. The reason we insist he was the best ruler in Chinese history, bar none, is because of another achievement, one that was unprecedented and never to be repeated. This achievement is recorded in the histories in just 4 Chinese characters, Gudan Wu Qian.
It comes from the official Book of Han, written in the Eastern Han dynasty. For the year we've highlighted in our title, 62 BC, the original text says, "In recent years, harvests have been bountiful. The price of grain is 5 coins per dan." So what's the big deal about a simple price record? Why is this so important? To understand, we must become historical detectives and break down these 4 characters, one by one. First, Gu, meaning grain. In Han-era literature, Gu is a general term for the 5 grains, which included varieties of millet, rice, wheat, and soybeans. Since Chinese historical records primarily focus on the dynasty and its capital, our investigation must center on the capital of the Han dynasty, Chang'an. Modern-day Xi'an, located in the Guangdong Plain, is a vast northern agricultural region where wheat is the primary crop today. However, 2,000 years ago, during the Western Han, wheat yields were too low for it to be the main staple. The farmers of Guangdong widely cultivated a different kind of gu, millet. Therefore, we can state with 100% certainty that the gu mentioned here refers to unhusked millet. Second, dan, an ancient Chinese unit of measurement. This character can represent either weight or volume. But when dealing with grain, it is almost always a unit of volume. Based on Han Dynasty texts and excavated artifacts, modern historians have accurately determined that 1 Han Dynasty dan is equal to 20 modern liters. But how much is that in weight? First, we must understand this is unhusked millet. By consulting a wide range of ancient Chinese texts, we can derive a very precise husk-to-grain volume loss ratio for Han Dynasty millet, 40%. This means that 20 liters of unhusked gu would yield 12 liters of pure, husked millet. Next, using the standard bulk density of millet, 0.75 kilograms per liter, we arrive at a final weight of 9 kilograms. Conclusion: 1 Han Dynasty dan of unhusked gu is equivalent to 9 kilograms of pure, edible grain. Third, qian, a unit of currency. During this specific period of the Han, qian refers to one thing and one thing only, the famous Wuju coin. This coin, first minted by Emperor Wu in 118 BC, would remain in circulation for over 700 years. The currency used to buy grain in Emperor Xuan's time was, without a doubt, the Wuzhu coin. Fourth, Wu, the number 5. Now let's put it all together. In the year 62 BC, in the capital city of Chang'an, the price for 9 kilograms of millet was 5 Wuzhu coins. So what? Let's put this into context with some other data points. 150 years earlier, at the founding of the Han dynasty, the price of grain was recorded as 5,000 coins per dan. On occasion, it could even reach 10,000 coins per hu. That is 1,000 to 2,000 times more expensive than the price under Emperor Xuan. Of course, the early Han was a time of humanitarian crisis after decades of war, a time when the emperor himself couldn't find 4 horses of the same color to pull his carriage. Next, let's look at Emperor Wu's time. Under normal conditions, the price of 1 dan of millet was 150 coins, 30 times higher than under Emperor Xuan. And that was the normal price. When Emperor Wu was waging his wars, the price could skyrocket to 500 coins per dan, 100 times higher. Let's look at other famous golden ages in Chinese history. During the celebrated reign of Wen and Jing, a period of peace and recovery, the price of grain was recorded as 10 coins per dan. The price under Emperor Xuan was still only half of that. In the Great Tang dynasty, another peak of Chinese civilization, the price of grain during the famed Zhenguan era was said to be 3 coins per du. After a comparable conversion, the price under Emperor Xuan was still less than 1/10 of the price under Emperor Taizong. If these numerical comparisons don't fully convey the significance of this price, let's look at a contemporary comparison from the same era. According to excavated Han era records, the price of 1 jin, about half a pound of meat, was roughly 5 coins. That means 9 kilograms of grain cost the same as about 250 grams, half a pound of meat. The records also show that a low-level civil servant earned about 100 coins a month. That means 1 month's salary could buy 180 kilograms of grain. A relatively higher-paid junior officer on the frontier earned between 600 and 1,200 coins a month, enough to buy at least 1 metric ton of grain. Let's do something even bolder. Let's try to convert this grain price to a modern equivalent. This is a risky exercise, as cross-temporal price comparisons are notoriously difficult. Grain itself is often the baseline for such comparisons, not the subject. So, our results are for reference only. Our conversion tool this time will be meat, specifically pork. According to Han records, 9 kilograms of grain was worth about 250 grams of meat. This means 1 kilogram of millet was worth about 28 grams of pork. In today's mainland China, a common price for 1 kilogram of pork is 40 renminbi. At this rate, 28 grams of pork is worth about 1.12 renminbi. This means the price of 1 kilogram of millet in the Han dynasty was equivalent to 1.12 RMB today, or about 16 US cents. In today's Chinese market, 1 kilogram of millet costs about 6 renminbi. On the international commodity market, the recent average price for 1 kilogram of food-grade millet is about 3.5, around 50 US cents. Even high-quality rice on the international market costs about 62 US cents per kilogram.
When our team arrived at this conclusion after multiple calculations, we fell silent for a long time. Yes, our methods are not perfectly rigorous. A cross-temporal comparison like this is, in many ways, unfair, but it gives us a glimpse of a beautiful possibility. That maybe, just maybe, 2,000 years ago, in China, under the rule of this emperor, his subjects enjoyed the glory of their rivals submitting, the joy of their family returning home, a grain price that was unbelievably low, and a peace free from the sacrifice of war. They enjoyed all of it. A time that was, for all intents and purposes, a miracle.
Perhaps we should place this price in an even larger context. Let's turn our gaze to Rome and examine the grain prices in the capitals of these 2 great empires. It's crucial to note that, for political and institutional reasons, both the Roman Republic and the Roman Empire had a unique system of intervention for their capital city. The Cura Annoni, or the grain dole. The history of this policy dates back to 123 BC, with the Lex Sempronia Frumentaria pushed forward by Gaius Gracchus. This law stipulated that Roman citizens had the right to buy grain at a subsidized price of 6 1/3 asses per modius. Over time, this policy evolved, culminating in 58 BC, when the Lex Clodia, passed by Clodius, made the grain dole completely free for eligible citizens. This date, once again, is astonishingly close to our focal year of 62 BC. So, with Rome's grain being distributed for free, how can we possibly compare the prices in the two capitals? First, the grain dole was strictly limited to a list of about 150,000 to 320,000 adult male citizens residing in the city of Rome. Women, children, slaves, and foreigners were completely excluded. This means that for the vast majority of Rome's 1 million inhabitants, grain still had to be purchased on the open market. Finally, we have chosen labor compensation purchasing power as our intermediate value. And because the primary staple crops of Han and Rome were different, millet and wheat, respectively, our calculation can only be a referential comparison. Let's skip the complex process of data verification and calculation and go straight to our conclusion. In the late Roman Republic, during the time of Cicero, the monthly wage of an ordinary Roman citizen could purchase approximately 270 kilograms of wheat. According to our previous investigation, the monthly income of a low-level Han civil servant could purchase about 180 kilograms of millet. In terms of grain purchasing power, the Han dynasty achieved roughly 2/3 of what Rome did with its famous grain dole policy. This is both a stunning coincidence and a breathtaking achievement. Let's look back at the Han Dynasty Emperor Xuan inherited. On the surface, it was a peaceful empire. But in reality, he inherited the broken state left by Emperor Wu's decades of relentless warfare, an empire where over half the realm's resources were depleted. Though there had been a brief 7-year period of recovery, it was nowhere near enough. Second, the time he truly held power was incredibly short. For the first several years of his reign, all power was in the hands of the regent, Guang. He could only endure, with almost no room to act. It was only after Guang's death that he truly began to rule. And from that point until his own death, the time he had to govern as a mature statesman was just over a decade.
An orphan who emerged from prison in the countryside, inherited a wounded empire, lay dormant for years in the shadow of a powerful regent, and then, in just over a decade, built a golden age that was a miracle in military, diplomatic, and economic terms. It is the difficulty behind this achievement that makes it so exceptionally precious. And now, we must answer another question. How? To find out, please continue to follow our China Chronicles series. But before that, to conclude this episode, we have chosen a piece by a great Han Dynasty literary master, Yang Xiong, The Fu on the Sweet Springs Palace. This is a Han-era rhapsody praising the Sweet Springs Palace, a summer retreat expanded by Emperor Wu. It was here, in this very palace, that Emperor Xuan received the submission of the Xiongnu Chanyu Huhanye. Let us journey back in a dream to the Han Dynasty and feel the spirit of this miraculous golden age.
东逐沧海，西要流沙，北荒幽都，南阳丹崖。宣战求调，据长肝胆。应干黄龙溪，飘恶朔林。瑞攘攘兮，巍如山。于是士毕公侯，回车而归。天困绝兮，地盈开。八荒斜兮，万国斜。登长平兮，擂鼓科；天生起兮，用势力。曰飞扬兮，于庞沛；于旭德兮，立万世。光辉炫耀，将绝服兮；子子孙孙。 长路继续。